Alone in the house, Emily felt the oppressive silence press down on her. The attic door stood ajar at the end of the hallway, beckoning her with an unseen force. The house had been in her family for generations. Now it was just her and her memories. Her parents had passed and she'd come to sort through their things. The attic was always off limits when she was younger. Her mother would always tell her, "Don't go up there. It's dangerous." But now, alone, Emily was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. With a deep breath, Emily stepped closer to the attic door. She hadn't thought about it in years, yet it always lingered in the back of her mind. There was something about it. As her fingers touched the cold brass handle, a shiver ran down her spine. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open, revealing the darkened stairs leading upward. The attic smelled of dust and old wood. Each step creaked beneath her weight as she ascended, the air growing colder the higher she climbed. The silence was unbearable, thick and stifling. At the top, the door was half open, and the light barely spilled into the room. Emily hesitated, then pushed the door fully open. The attic lay in shadows, untouched for years. Old furniture covered in white sheets filled the space, along with boxes and trunks stacked in disarray. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the room itself carried years of forgotten secrets. She stepped in, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The wooden beams above creaked, and a faint draft made the sheets flutter slightly. She felt an unsettling presence. Emily's eyes darted to a large trunk at the far end of the room, its brass locks tarnished with age. It seemed familiar. She couldn't explain why, but something about it seemed important. She approached the trunk slowly, heart hammering in her chest. The room was freezing now, the temperature dropping noticeably as she drew nearer. She felt as though the attic was alive. As she knelt beside the trunk, she noticed something strange, scratches along its surface as if something had tried to escape. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. What was inside? A sudden noise echoed from the corner of the attic, causing Emily to jump. She spun around, but nothing was there, just the rustling of old sheets. Still, the air felt charged with tension. She opened the trunk, the creak of the lid too loud in the stillness. Inside, there were old photographs, yellowed letters, and mementos of lives long past. But there was something else, something hidden beneath. As her hands reached for it, Emily felt a cold chill radiate from the trunk. Her fingers brushed against something soft and fleshy. She pulled it out, a tattered doll, its eyes hollow. The moment she held it, the attic seemed to grow darker, the air growing thicker around her. The doll's eyes appeared to gleam in the dim light, a sinister glint catching her gaze. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She set the doll down quickly, but it felt as if it had changed the atmosphere in the room. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A low groan echoed through the attic. Emily turned, looking desperately for the source. But the room remained unchanged, still and silent. Yet the feeling of something lurking was undeniable. She turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Emily gasped, her heart racing. The temperature dropped even more, her breath now visible in the freezing air. Something shifted in the shadows, something large, and she could hear it breathing. It wasn't human. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet refused to move. She was trapped. The doll's eyes flashed again, and then, there it was. A figure, cloaked in darkness, looming in the far corner. It moved, a slow, deliberate motion, as though it had all the time in the world. Emily backed away, her hands outstretched, searching for the door. But the figure didn't seem to be in a hurry. It moved toward her with unnerving calm, its face hidden in shadow. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to escape. She reached for the door handle again, but her fingers couldn't grasp it. It felt like something was holding it shut from the other side. The figure was closer now, its presence suffocating. The air grew thick with a sense of dread, as if the house itself was trying to push her out of the attic. But something was preventing her from leaving. A voice whispered from the darkness, low and raspy. "You shouldn't have opened it." Emily spun around but saw nothing. The figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows. She was alone again. But the whisper lingered, curling around her thoughts. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Emily felt it in her bones. She wasn't alone in the attic. She never had been. Her pulse quickened as the temperature plummeted further, the cold now seeping into her very bones. She pulled at the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The shadows seemed to grow thicker. The air around her seemed to hum with static, an electric charge that buzzed in her ears. The feeling of being watched intensified. Something was moving, circling just out of sight. Suddenly, the attic light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. She wasn't sure what was real anymore. What was she hearing? The attic seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The corners of the room darkened, and the air grew heavier. She was sure she could feel the presence of something ancient, something vengeful. The whispers returned louder now. "You shouldn't have opened it," they repeated, echoing in her mind. She tried to block them out, but the words seemed to grow louder, filling the room with their sinister chant. The floorboards creaked behind her. Emily spun around, expecting to see something, but it was only the shadows stretching across the room. The figure wasn't there. Not yet. Her mind raced. What had she unleashed? What was in the attic? She had to leave. Had to get out before it found her. She tugged at the door again, desperation flooding her veins. The shadows shifted again, faster this time. A silhouette appeared, growing more solid, more defined. Emily backed into the corner, eyes wide with terror. The figure was real. It was coming for her. With a final scream, Emily lunged for the door, her hands fumbling with the handle. But before she could escape, the figure reached out, its cold fingers brushing her arm. The room went black. The next morning, the door to the attic stood open, the room quiet once more. The trunk was empty, the doll nowhere to be found. But the air was still thick with dread, a promise of things left unfinished. The attic door creaked as it swung open. Dust particles floated in the air, disturbed after years of neglect. Sarah stood frozen at the threshold, hesitant to step inside. The house had been abandoned for decades. Sarah's grandmother had left it to her after passing, and now she stood at the door, unsure of what she might find within. She could almost feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on her. Stories of strange noises, flickering lights, and shadows in the corners of rooms had always surrounded it. It was a rainy evening, and the wind howled outside. The only light came from a faint bulb hanging above the attic stairs. The atmosphere felt thick, heavy with secrets. The stairs groaned under her weight as Sarah climbed slowly. Each step was a reminder of the years this place had been untouched, forgotten by most. But not by her. At the top of the stairs, the attic door was half open, as though someone had been in the room recently. She paused, feeling an eerie chill crawl up her spine. A strange unease washed over her, but curiosity drove her forward. Her grandmother had warned her never to enter this space, but she'd never explained why. Now Sarah would discover the truth. Inside, the room was dark, with only slivers of light cutting through the grime-covered windows. Shadows clung to every corner, making it feel as though the room was alive, watching her. The floorboards creaked as she stepped deeper into the attic. The scent of old wood and mildew filled the air. The shelves were lined with dusty boxes and forgotten treasures. In the far corner of the room, a large, covered object caught her attention. She moved closer, pulling the sheet away. Beneath it, a dusty old trunk sat, its brass lock rusted with age. The sight of the trunk stirred something deep within her. It wasn't just the dust or the age. It was the feeling that it held something important, something that had been hidden for a reason. Sarah crouched down and tried to open the trunk, but the lock held fast. She ran her fingers along the rusty metal, wondering what lay inside. A sudden cold breeze swept through the attic, She heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the wind, and froze. It was as though the house itself was speaking to her, warning her against opening the trunk. But she didn't stop. With a final, desperate twist, the lock gave way. The trunk creaked open, revealing its contents. The room seemed to grow darker as she gazed inside, her breath catching in her throat. Inside the trunk lay an old weathered journal, its leather cover cracked and faded with time. Alongside it was a small, intricately carved box. She reached for the journal first. As her fingers brushed the journal's pages, she felt a jolt of energy shoot through her. It was as though the room had shifted, as if something ancient had awakened. The journal's pages were filled with odd symbols, written in a language she didn't recognize. But beneath the symbols there were sketches of a woman, her grandmother. The sight made Sarah's heart race. The box felt heavy in her hands. She hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside she found a delicate necklace, its stone dark and mesmerizing. It pulsed faintly as though alive. As soon as she touched the necklace, a voice echoed in her mind, cold and sharp. "You should not have come." The words sent a shiver through her, and her pulse quickened. The temperature in the attic dropped significantly. Sarah pulled the necklace away, feeling an unnatural weight on her chest. The shadows seemed to stretch and move, closing in around her. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her. She backed away, heart pounding in her chest, but the door to the attic slammed shut with a violent bang. She was trapped. Suddenly, the air in the attic thickened, and the room seemed to distort. The walls stretched and contracted as though the space itself was alive, reacting to her presence. A figure appeared in the corner of the room, its form hazy at first, but gradually becoming more solid. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil of shadows. Sarah took a step back, her body trembling with fear. The figure moved toward her, its footsteps silent on the floor. A low, guttural voice whispered, "I warned you." The figure reached out, its cold fingers brushing Sarah's arm. She recoiled, but the touch felt like it was burning through her skin. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows deepened. The attic seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing more suffocating. The voice returned, this time clearer, louder. "You have awoken what was sleeping." Sarah tried to move, but her legs felt heavy, as though they were rooted to the floor. She couldn't escape. The figure stepped closer, and the temperature in the room plummeted further. The shadows in the room began to shift and twist, their shapes becoming more defined. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, all watching her with hollow, empty eyes. Panic surged within her. She reached for the door, but the shadows moved faster, cutting her off. The figure was right behind her now, its presence suffocating. It spoke again, its voice filled with malice. "You are not welcome here," the voice hissed. "The attic is not your domain." The room seemed to pulse with an overwhelming force, the walls vibrating in sync with her heartbeat. Sarah's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The shadows were closing in, the air thick with their presence. She could feel their cold fingers on her skin. Suddenly, the trunk creaked, and the journal and necklace flew out, landing at her feet. The attic seemed to come alive with a terrifying energy, as though the objects had triggered something. The room seemed to tremble with the force of unseen power. Sarah felt the necklace's stone pulse again, this time with greater intensity. She picked it up, hoping for a way to stop whatever was happening. The shadows lunged at her, their cold touch clawing at her skin. Sarah screamed, the sound echoing in the oppressive space. The figure was inches away from her, its eyes burning with dark intent. With a final desperate cry, Sarah hurled the necklace at the figure. As it made contact, the shadows screamed, and the room exploded with light. The attic door flung open. Sarah stumbled out of the attic, gasping for air, her heart racing. She looked back to see the attic door slowly creaking shut, as if it were sealing away what had just been unleashed. But the necklace was gone. and so was the presence. She was alone, at least for now. But she knew, deep down, that the attic's secret had not been fully revealed. Not yet. The house creaked in the quiet of the night, its age evident in every groan of the floorboards. Ellie paused at the foot of the stairs, staring up at the attic door. For years, the attic had been off limits, a forbidden place. Ellie's parents never spoke of it, yet there were always rumors that something was hidden within. She had to find out. The air felt thick and musty, as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for her to make this decision. A cold draft slipped from beneath the door. Ellie's heart beat faster as she climbed the stairs. The old wood creaked under her feet, groaning with the weight of the house's long history. She reached the door. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob. The attic had always felt like a place apart, isolated from the rest of the house. She wondered why her parents had kept it locked. The door swung open with a squeal of protest. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the cluttered space before her. Ellie stepped inside, her feet kicking up small clouds of dust as she explored the room. Old furniture, forgotten boxes, and antique portraits covered the walls. The room felt heavy. A large trunk in the corner caught her attention. It was old, the wood chipped and faded, its lock rusty with age. She felt drawn to it, as though it had a secret to reveal. As she moved closer, Ellie's breath caught in her throat. A faint whisper echoed through the room, so quiet it was almost a figment of her imagination. Was it the wind? Her fingers brushed against the trunk's surface, the wood cold to the touch. The whisper grew louder, clearer. It wasn't the wind. Someone, or something, was in the room with her. The shadows in the attic seemed to shift, their shapes bending and twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. Ellie's pulse quickened. The air was getting colder, the whispers stronger. She could barely hear her own thoughts over the sound of the whispers. They spoke in a language she didn't understand, urgent and frantic, like voices begging to be heard. Ellie's mind raced. Was the house haunted? Or was it something more? She took a deep breath and reached for the lock on the trunk, determined to uncover the mystery. With a sharp click, the lock came undone. Ellie opened the trunk slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, she found an assortment of old papers and strange trinkets. At the top of the trunk was a journal, its leather cover worn with age. She lifted it carefully, flipping through the pages. Strange symbols covered the pages, written in an unfamiliar hand. The air seemed to grow colder with each page she turned. Her skin prickled with an odd sensation, as though she were being watched. The journal was filled with cryptic writings, disturbing sketches. One page showed an old portrait of a woman who looked eerily familiar. Her heart skipped a beat as Ellie realized the woman resembled her grandmother, who had disappeared years ago. Ellie's hands trembled as she turned another page. The next sketch was of a room that looked exactly like the attic she was standing in. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness. Ellie gasped, the journal falling from her hands. A low, guttural sound echoed through the space, chilling her to the bone. The whispers returned, now louder, more frantic. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, taking on more defined shapes. Figures began to materialize in the corners, watching her with empty eyes. Ellie backed away from the trunk, but the shadows followed, creeping toward her. She could feel the coldness of their presence, their eyes boring into her. She was not alone. A figure stepped forward, its form vague at first, then slowly becoming clearer. It was a woman, her face hidden beneath a veil of shadow. Her voice was like a low growl. "You should not have come here," the figure said. The word sent a chill down Ellie's spine. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt tight, suffocated by the presence of the figure. Ellie turned to run, but the door wouldn't open. The shadows moved in closer, and the woman's voice whispered again, her words laced with malice. "You are not welcome in this place." The temperature in the room dropped drastically. Ellie could see her breath in the air, each exhale like a cloud in the frigid space. The shadows grew longer, enveloping the room. The woman's form seemed to shift, becoming more solid. She was standing right in front of Ellie now, her face obscured by shadows. A voice echoed in Ellie's mind. "Leave this place." Ellie couldn't move. The shadows seemed to close in on her, surrounding her from all sides. She was trapped. Her breath became shallow as fear gripped her heart. With a desperate cry, Ellie reached for the journal, hoping it might hold some kind of answer. As her fingers brushed the pages, the shadows recoiled. The room seemed to tremble. The journal's pages glowed faintly, the symbols on them shifting as if alive. The air hummed with energy, and Ellie felt a strange sense of power course through her. The woman stepped back, her form flickering in and out of existence. "You have disturbed the seal," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "Now you must pay the price." Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. She had uncovered something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. The attic wasn't just a room, it was a prison for something ancient. The shadows began to retreat, swirling around the room before disappearing into the walls. The temperature slowly returned to normal, but Ellie knew it wasn't over. The attic had only revealed part of its secret. She ran to the door, the handle now cold and slick under her trembling fingers. With a final, desperate pull, the door swung open. Ellie stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. But the attic door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. She turned, her eyes wide with terror, but the hallway was empty. The house felt eerily silent, as if it were holding its breath. Ellie backed away from the door, her mind racing. What had she uncovered? What had she unleashed? And was it truly over? The attic's secrets had only just begun to surface. The whispers echoed in her mind once more, distant but persistent. Ellie knew that the attic's curse had been passed on to her. The house had found a new keeper for its dark secret,